On the day she turned 18, a girl walked out of a county shelter with a paper sack of clothes and a brass key to an abandoned sugar shack no one had set foot in for 13 years. What she found under those floorboards wasn't just a tin box. It was the truth about who she was and who had been fighting for her all along. If you have ever felt like the world forgot your name on purpose, like you were a problem somebody else was waiting out, then stay with me. Hit that subscribe button. This story is for you. At 18, you're not supposed to inherit a ghost. But on the morning I aged out of the state's care, a ghost was the only thing in the world I owned. There was no cake. There was no song. There was Carol behind the front desk at the women's shelter where I had been sleeping for the last 6 months of high school, sliding a thin envelope across the counter without looking up from her clipboard. Carol was not unkind. She was tired. She wore her tired the way some women wear a wedding ring, every day, in every weather, without thinking about it. The envelope held a check for $400, state stipend. 18 years of a girl, valued by the county at the price of one used winter coat. At my feet was a brown paper grocery sack with everything I had managed to carry out of my last foster placement. 2 pairs of jeans, 3 sweaters, one of them unraveling at the cuff. A worn paperback of poems my grandmother had sent me one winter when I was small, before the visits stopped. A pair of waterproof boots that had been donated to the shelter and happened to fit me. And a single faded photograph, edges soft from handling, of a woman with gray hair pulled back in a kerchief standing on the porch of a low wooden building with steam rising behind her into a blue winter sky. The woman was Eleanor Vance, my grandmother. I had not seen her since I was 4. Carol slid one more thing across the counter, a stiff manila envelope with my name written on the front in a careful, sloping handwriting I did not recognize. "This came for you last month," she said. Her voice was as flat as the dishwater sky outside. "A lawyer up in the hill country sent it." I looked at the envelope. I looked at the check. I looked at her. "Good luck, Hannah," she said. That was the whole goodbye. The lobby smelled the way it always smelled on a Sunday morning, stale coffee and disinfectant and old carpet, and outside the rain was coming down in long, mean slants that had turned the parking lot into a mirror. I picked up my paper sack. I stuffed the envelope into my coat pocket. I walked out the front door, and I did not look back. I had no idea the envelope in my pocket was about to change everything. The lawyer's office sat above a feed store in a town 3 bus transfers north, in a county whose name I had only ever seen on 2 old letters in my case file. The wooden stairs creaked under my boots. The hallway smelled of old paper and furniture polish, a smell I would come to love as much as any smell on this earth. The frosted glass door at the end said, "Arthur Abernathy, Attorney at Law," in gold lettering that had begun to crack at the corners. Arthur Abernathy was old in a way that was almost reassuring. Thin white hair, carefully combed across a freckled scalp, a neatly trimmed white beard, a pair of round wire spectacles. He peered at me over rather than through. When he stood to shake my hand, his grip was dry and surprisingly firm, and his voice was deep and slow, like a porch swing on a still afternoon. "Miss Vance," he said, "I've been waiting on you a long while. Sit, please." He didn't offer condolences. He opened a brown folder, slid a paper across the desk, and turned it so I could read it right side up. "Your grandmother, Eleanor Vance, passed away 13 years ago this March," he said. "Her will was drafted in this office. The terms specified that the bulk of her estate be held in trust until you came of age. Today is that day." The print blurred a little. I made myself look at it. "She left you 80 acres of high-country sugar bush land," he said, "plus a small wood-frame sugar shack with a working evaporator, a stone-walled storage cellar, and a one-room cabin that hasn't been lived in since the spring she passed." A sugar shack. 80 acres of maple trees. I almost laughed because it was so far from anything I had let myself imagine that it didn't quite seem to belong to me. "There are outstanding county taxes against the property," he said, peering at me over his glasses. "After a hardship adjustment your grandmother prearranged, the amount due is $5. $5, I repeated. $5. The property is considered a poor parcel. The road in is gravel and washes out in the spring. The cabin needs a new roof. The evaporator hasn't been fired in over a decade. Most people would call the whole place worthless." He paused. "There is also a standing offer. A maple company out of the next valley over, Northern Crown Maple Company, has been making offers through this office for the past 11 years. The most recent is $5,000. $5,000. The number landed in the room like a stone in a deep well. $5,000 was a security deposit on a real apartment. $5,000 was a community college class. $5,000 was the first foothold I had ever been offered on the slick, steep wall I had been falling down for as long as I could remember. I sat there a long moment. I let myself feel the weight of it. I let myself imagine, for one bright second, walking out of that office with a check in my coat pocket and never seeing a sugar shack in my life. Then I thought about the photograph in my paper sack, the woman in the kerchief, the steam rising into a blue winter sky. "I'm not selling," I heard myself say. "It's mine. I want to see it." Arthur Abernathy studied me for a long moment over the rim of his spectacles. The corner of his mouth lifted just the smallest fraction of an inch. "Your grandmother bet me a nickel that you would say exactly that," he said. He opened a drawer. He took out a brass key on a red ribbon. He set it gently in my hand. "I owe her a nickel. Welcome home, Miss Vance." It was the stupidest thing I had ever done. It was the best. The bus to the high country took nearly the whole afternoon. I sat by the window with the brass key warm in my palm and watched the country change one slow mile at a time. Strip malls thinned into car lots thinned into farms. Farms gave way to long, quiet pastures, and pastures climbed into hills. And the hills closed in on either side of the two-lane road until the bus was rattling up a narrow road through country that smelled, when I cracked the window, of pine and damp earth and the cold mineral scent of snowmelt. The driver let me off at a gravel turnout where a hand-lettered sign pointed down a dirt track. Rockledge Hollow, Pop 218. I shouldered my paper sack and I walked. I stopped first at a small diner on the main street, a low building with white siding and a hand-painted sign that read, "Martha's." The bell over the door jangled as I came in, and a wide, slow-moving woman behind the counter looked up from a coffee pot and considered me for a long, unhurried moment. "Help you, honey?" "I'm looking for the old Vance Sugar Shack," I said. She set the coffee pot down very carefully. Her eyes moved from my face to the paper sack at my feet and back to my face. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Hannah Vance." Martha closed her eyes for a long second, the way a woman does when something she has been hoping for finally turns up at the door. Then she came around the counter, and she took both my hands in hers, and her hands were warm and rough and smelled faintly of cinnamon and dish soap. "Eleanor's granddaughter," she said quietly. "Lord have mercy. She said you'd come one day. She said it right at this counter." She sat me down in a booth and made me eat a grilled cheese sandwich and a bowl of tomato soup. She would not take $1 for any of it. "I don't know what they told you about her," she said, looking out the window, "but you should know she fought. She fought every step of the way." I did not know what to say to that. I had been told my whole life that my grandmother had abandoned me. The word abandoned had been in 2 separate case files. I had read it with my own eyes. Martha drove me up to the property herself in an old pickup that smelled of hay and wood smoke. The gravel road climbed for 2 miles through maple woods that were just starting to bud out, the bark of the old sugar maples furred with pale green moss on the north side of every trunk. At the end of the road, the trees opened into a clearing, and the first sight of the property hit me the way a held breath hits the throat when you finally let it out. The cabin sagged on one corner. The sugar shack sat 50 yards off, a long, low building with a peaked metal roof going to rust along the seam, its door padlocked, its windows boarded with weathered plywood. Behind both buildings, climbing up the slope of the hollow, was the sugar bush itself, hundreds upon hundreds of old maples, some of them 3 feet thick at the base, all of them standing very straight and very quiet in the slanting afternoon light. For one bad minute, I almost climbed back into Martha's truck. What I saw waiting for me there made me want to turn around. I'm glad I didn't. Martha left me with a thermos of coffee, a quilt, and a paper sack with a sandwich in it. She said only, "You come down to the diner if you need anything, child." I told her I would. She turned the truck around. She drove away. And I was alone in a clearing in the mountains with 80 acres of maple trees and a brass key on a red ribbon. The padlock was stiff with rust. I leaned my whole shoulder against it. There was a long protesting screech of metal on metal, and then a satisfying clunk, and the shackle sprang free, and the door swung inward on hinges that had not moved in 13 years. A wave of trapped air washed out over me. Sweet, almost. Old maple, wood smoke long cold. The smell of damp earth and rust and trapped time, all of it folded into one breath the building had been holding since the spring my grandmother died. I stepped inside. The evaporator dominated the room, a long, shallow pan of dark, riveted metal raised on a brick firebox with a tin hood above it for the steam. A stack of split firewood, still neatly arrayed against the back wall. Brass spigots in a row on a wooden shelf. Wooden buckets stacked in a corner. Everything was laid out the way a woman lays out her kitchen the night before a big morning, ready for the work to begin again at dawn. Shafts of dusty sunlight cut down through the cracks in the boarded windows and laid bars of light across the wide plank floor. It was the saddest, most patient room I had ever stood in. It had been waiting for someone for 13 years. I walked the length of the shack slowly. The boards groaned under my boots, and in the dead center of the room, beneath the brick firebox of the evaporator, one floorboard sat a 1/4 inch higher than the boards on either side of it. Just slightly, the way a thing sits when it has been lifted out and set back many times. I knelt down. My hands were shaking. I worked my fingers into the gap, and I lifted the board free. There was a hollow beneath. Stone-walled, packed earth at the bottom, the size of a small footlocker. Inside sat a tin biscuit box, and beside it, a smaller package wrapped in waxed cloth. I lifted the tin out first. I set it in a bar of sunlight. I pried the lid up with my thumbs. Inside the tin were straw and 4 tightly rolled bundles of bills, each one bound with a strip of red ribbon. My mind would not let me take it in. I lifted one bundle out. I unrolled it. Hundreds. All of them hundreds. I counted slowly to keep my hands steady. $12,500 in that bundle. I counted another. The same. I sat back hard on the cold plank floor of the sugar shack with $50,000 in my lap, and a strange choked sound came out of my throat that I had never made before. I laughed. The laugh echoed in the long, low room and came back at me and turned, halfway across the floor, into something else. I sat with my back against the brick firebox, and I cried in a way I had not cried since I was a little girl. I cried for the woman in the kerchief on the porch. I cried for the 4-year-old in the photograph. I cried because someone had loved me enough to leave me this, and I had not known. And they had told me she had abandoned me, and the word had been in a file. I don't know how long I sat there. The bars of light moved across the floor and went orange. The shack got cold. Eventually, I wiped my face on my sleeve and I lifted the second package out of the hollow under the floor. The waxed cloth bundle held a small battery-powered cassette player and a single cassette tape in a clear plastic case. A piece of paper was folded around the cassette. It said only, in that careful, sloping hand, "Play me on the porch. The sun should be going down. Take your time." I carried the player and the tape out onto the porch of the cabin. I sat on the top step. The sun was already low behind the ridge, throwing long shadows across the snow-melt grass. I slid the cassette into the player. I pressed play. There was a soft hiss, the click of someone settling closer to the microphone. And then, for the first time in 14 years, I heard my grandmother's voice. "Hannah, sweetheart, if you're listening to this, then you're sitting on my porch, and you are 18 years old, and the world has put you through more than it had any right to. I'm so sorry, baby. I am so sorry. I want you to hear that first before I say anything else. I tried so hard to keep you." She had to stop. I could hear her gathering herself on the tape. I sat on the cold porch step with my hand over my mouth. "They told you I gave you up. I want you to know what really happened. When your mama died, there was a man named Travis Marlowe who came around. Your daddy's older brother. He was not a good man. He wanted this land. He had wanted it since he was a teenager. He found out after your mama passed that the property would go to you the day you turned 18, and he started making moves to get custody of you so he could control what was yours. He had money. He had a lawyer. And I was 64 years old, with a heart condition and a sugar shack, and not much else. I went to court 3 times, baby. I lost on purpose the 3rd time. I did. I let them say I was unfit. I let them put it in the file. I let them give you to the state, because the state was the one place on this earth Travis Marlowe could not reach you. If I had won, he would have known exactly where you slept. He would have used you against me until I signed this ground away. The only way to keep you safe was to put you somewhere he could not see you. And I lost you on purpose, Hannah, and I want you to know it broke me. And I want you to know I never stopped loving you for one single day." I could not breathe. I sat on the porch with my hands pressed against my mouth, and I listened. The sugar bush is not a poor parcel. 80 acres of old-growth sugar maples in this country is one of the most valuable things a person can own, if they know how to work it. Northern Crown is going to keep coming. Don't sell. Lease the taps. Make them pay by the gallon. Make them pay into a fund for this town. Martha knows the families that need help. Arthur knows the law. There are also seed papers and tap rights filed with the county that protect this hollow from being clear-cut. Those papers are in my name, and now they are in yours. You hold them tight. The floor is the key. Everything starts with what's under the floor. There was a long quiet. Then she said, very softly, the way a woman says a thing she has been holding in her chest for years, "You have your mother's hands. You have my stubbornness. That stubbornness is going to save you now. I love you, Hannah. I have loved you every day. Thank you for coming home." The tape clicked off. The hiss ran out. The sun had gone down behind the ridge. I sat on the porch step in the blue dusk with the cassette player in my lap, and I did not move for a long time. Then I went inside, lit the kerosene lantern I found on the table, and read the seed papers and tap rights filings my grandmother had left rolled in a tube beside the cassette. They were exactly what she had said they were. The next several weeks moved in a blur of hard physical labor. I scrubbed 13 years of mildew off the cabin floor with lye soap. I pried the boards off the windows of the shack and let the light back in. I split kindling until my palms blistered, and Martha gave me a pair of leather gloves that fit. A retired logger named Henry walked up the gravel road one Wednesday afternoon with a chainsaw and a thermos of coffee, and he said only, Heard you needed the dead limbs cleared off the lane. Your grandmother sat with my wife the autumn she was passing. I owe her a Wednesday." He worked until dark and refused payment. Martha brought me a pot of stew once a week. A woman I had never met left a stack of folded sheets on the porch one morning with a note that said only, "For the cabin. We knew Eleanor. Welcome home." The first letter from Northern Crown Maple Company arrived in the third week. The offer was $25,000 now. A second arrived 9 days later. It used the words eminent domain and county petition and blight in the same paragraph, like a man laying 3 matches in a row on a dry table. This place didn't just give me a roof, it changed me, and now somebody wanted to take it. I walked into Arthur Abernathy's office on a clear, cold morning in early April, not knowing it would be the most important meeting of my life. 2 men in expensive suits were waiting at the long oak table. The older one had a practiced smile and silver cufflinks that flashed every time he moved his hands. The younger one did not smile at all. They stood up when I came in. They called me Hannah. They spoke about community. They spoke about partnership. They used the word progress the way a magician handles a coin he is about to make disappear. They slid a piece of paper across the table. $250,000. The number sat there in clean, printed numerals. $250,000 was a real house in a real town. It was college. It was every fear I had ever woken with at 3 in the morning, signed away on a single page. I let myself think for one honest moment. I thought about the blisters across my palms from the splitting mall. I thought about the woman in the kerchief on the porch with the steam rising behind her. I thought about the sentence my grandmother had said into a tape recorder the spring before she died. The floor is the key. Everything starts with what's under the floor. "No," I said. The older man's smile did not move, but something behind the smile shifted, the way a curtain shifts before a window opens. "Miss Vance," he started, "I don't think you understand." "I understand fine," I said. "I'm not selling this land. Not for $250,000. Not for $500,000. The sugar bush is not for sale. The shack is not for sale. The cabin is not for sale." The room got very quiet. "What I am willing to discuss," I said, and beside me Arthur Abernathy shifted very slightly in his chair, "is a 99-year lease on the tapping rights for the north half of the sugar bush. Lease, not sale. Annual payment in advance. Per gallon royalty on every gallon of syrup that comes off these trees, paid quarterly. 5% of those royalties go into a trust administered by this town for the volunteer fire department, the elementary school, and a fund in my grandmother's name for any child in this county who ages out of state care. The south half of the sugar bush stays untapped. The seed tree protections my grandmother filed stay in force in perpetuity. No clear-cutting on any portion of the parcel under any circumstance. The shack stays mine. The cabin stays mine. You touch one tap on the south slope or one shingle of that shack without my written permission, and the entire agreement voids on the spot. I slid the paper back across the table. "Take it," I said, "or leave it. I imagine your foresters have already told you what 80 acres of mature sugar maple is worth in a market this tight. I imagine that's why you have been knocking on my grandmother's door for the last 14 years. The older man's mouth went tight. The younger man was writing very fast. "We will be in touch, Miss Vance," the older man said in a voice that had nothing practiced in it anymore. They left. Arthur Abernathy waited a long, quiet moment, then turned slowly to me, and he looked at me over the top of his spectacles, and he said in his porch swing voice, "Your grandmother would have liked that very much, child. Very much indeed." The contract was signed 7 weeks later. They agreed to every term. The first quarterly check cleared in the early summer. The trust was registered in the county clerk's office that same week, with my grandmother's name on it in raised brass letters on a small plaque that Martha asked permission to mount herself above the door of the elementary school. She cried when she screwed it into the wood. She would not let me help. I stand on the porch of my grandmother's cabin now sometimes, in the early evening when the light has gone honey-colored across the hollow and the wood smoke is rising in a thin blue line from the chimney behind me. And I think about the girl in the shelter lobby with the brown paper sack at her feet. She thought she had been thrown away. She hadn't been. She had been hidden, on purpose, by a woman who knew exactly what she was doing. There is a difference, and it took me a long time to learn it. The cassette player sits on the kitchen table. The photograph from the paper sack is framed above it. The woman in the kerchief, the steam rising into the winter sky. Some nights I play the tape just to hear her voice again. She is always there. She has been there the whole time. Abandonment can become protection. A curse can become a blessing. An ending can become a beginning. My inheritance wasn't the money in the tin box, and it wasn't the royalty check that comes 4 times a year. My inheritance was the truth. The truth that I had been loved every day of my life by a woman who lost 3 court cases on purpose so that a man could not find me. The truth that what was under the floor was not really the cash. It was the why. If you have ever felt like the world forgot your name on purpose, like you were a problem somebody else was waiting out, hear me. You are not alone in your fight. There may be a woman somewhere who never stopped fighting for you, and you may not know her name yet. Tell me in the comments about the thing in your own life that you were told was abandonment and turned out to be something else. A person, a place, a door you thought had been closed against you that was really being held for you. I read every single one. Thank you for listening.